Hey guys, welcome back to another whiteboard chat, and today we're going to talk about amenorrhea recovery, and when you should consider returning to fat loss or returning to a deficit. Most common question that gets asked is, well, I'm having my menstrual cycle again. When can I get back to losing body fat, right? Because oftentimes during that recovery process, you're not losing body fat. You may even be gaining body fat, just depending on, obviously, very situational. But people want to know, like, hey, when can I get back to it? Especially those where body composition worsened. Now, that does not happen in everyone. Some people will see an improvement in body composition. But in any case, definitely the most common question. Let's talk about a few things before we make some, or talk about the considerations for timelines. What's causing the amenorrhea in the first place? Just because I think it's important to understand that different causes may dictate different timelines in terms of returning to a deficit. Most commonly, stress, right? I mean, stress manifesting in some way, whether that's more of a simple stress cortisol issue where it's causing progesterone steal, so the body is preferring that cortisol production as a necessity because it's you're overproducing cortisol because of stress. It's skipping the progesterone production. We end up with amenorrhea potentially. Hyperprolactinemia, or extremely elevated prolactin levels, causing issues with that progesterone level. Hypothalamic source, so that would be a signaling issue, literally the signaling from the hypothalamus in that hypothalamus pituitary axis, right? Because we could have an issue at the source, right, in the organ, the actual production organ, or at the signaling organ, right? Genetics. Well, there is a such thing as primary versus secondary amenorrhea, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Tumors or organ damage, the organs literally are damaged or missing in some people. Developmental issue. Hormonal birth control. Just draw a line here. Yeah, so HPC, or hormonal birth control, probably the most common cause outside of stress, right? Or some combination. Or a lot of people have a lot of stress and hormonal birth control. Hormonal birth control is obviously meant to stop regular menstrual cycle because it's a contraceptive, right? However, long-term use can cause a lot of downstream effects, and nobody really uses hormonal birth control for a couple months. I mean, it's generally used for years or decades, even in some cases. So that can cause a problem, and depending on how long that's used and what other combination of things are going on, the recovery process can be, more difficult. Primary versus secondary. Primary would literally be someone that has no menstrual cycle. They consider it no menstrual cycle by 14, as well as other developmental sexual characteristics. So, things you would think about, like puberty, right? I've seen 14, I've seen that as kind of a hard and fast number, but the point is that this person does not have normal development. Secondary is usually characterized as 3 months without a menstrual cycle. Pretty much, vast majority of the cases that we're going to see as coaches or in the physique community are secondary. Primary cases, like I said, could be a genetic defect, could be literal missing or damaged organ, some kind of developmental issue. Generally not the cases that we're seeing. I'm sure that the person would notify you of this if that were something that were actually going on. And a lot of times those people will have other developmental issues, especially if, like some kind of missing organ or damaged organ, and they may end up on medications or hormones or hormone replacement or different things that will help them develop normally or as normal as possible. So again, most of the cases that we're looking at are going to be secondary. Now that we've maybe identified why it happened, and we've worked through it, depending on what the cause was, we are in this scenario now where you've done a great job, you've made lifestyle changes, you have used supplemental protocols, you have used different types of testing to confirm things and investigate. You are now having a menstrual cycle. A lot of what I'll notice at first is we'll see these early symptoms. So we'll see a little bit of PMS symptoms in somebody, and then eventually it's like, okay, that's a good sign. We're having some signaling going on. Then the menstrual cycle comes, and now we're having like a full-fledged menstrual cycle that's happening on a regular, fairly regular basis. And what kind of timeline are we looking at to return to a calorie deficit if the goal is, improving body composition? This is a tough one because I will say that there are going to be scenarios where, yes, some subtle body composition improvements are okay, but depending on the reason that they're there, aka if they were a competitor prior, they might not ever want to return back to that because it might not be something that's really feasible to repeat, in the long run. They may, if they return back to what they were doing prior, competing, no matter how you go about it, you're probably going to run into issues. And even taking a perfectly healthy person that has a normal menstrual cycle and normal hormonal function and normal adrenal function and all of this beforehand, there's still a really good chance they're going to lose their cycle in a contest prep or have hormone dysfunction. You pretty much can't get stage lean without some degree of dysfunction in your body. That's not how your body works, physiologically. With that said, you can imagine if you take someone that already has had these problems, even though they're somewhat recovered, they may be more susceptible to readapting. So how I kind of like to think of it is you have to convince your body it's okay to let go. It's okay. You have to convince it. So if you've had your period for a month, you get it the second month in a row, you're doing good. Are you ready to jump back in the deficit? Probably not. And I see this. This is literally the most common thing I see, and it's kind of a joke inside the coaching industry, especially in the functional side, where it's like, hey, I'm fixed, thanks, going right back into prep. And inevitably, as you can imagine, they end up right back where they were. So I like to think of it as fixed time, so time for correction, versus hold time. A lot of the time, I like our hold time to at least equal our fixed time, and that can be a long time for some people. So if it was a situation where it took us 6 months to fix, that's probably an easier one, to be completely honest. Then probably want to hold for that long or longer. If it took us a year to fix, that might be more of like an average time frame, depending on the issue. Might want to hold for close to that long, or at least over 6 months before we get back into it. Now, if we're talking about people that it's taken 2 years more to fix, these might be the people that are going to really want to think about whether or not they want to do anything extreme ever again. And that's not to say, again, that they can't look good and feel okay about their body, but are they going to want to compete, get into extremely low body fat? Doubt it. Over 50% chance that they're going to basically end up right back where they were, and probably worse. Causes versus length of correction. So, I'm just talking about what were the reasons that you were there. Did you have just a couple stressful months in your life, something happened, you lost your period for a few months, and then we got it back? We could probably recover that relatively quickly. It's not going to be the same as that person that's battered their body for years and it took us 2 years to fix. Those two scenarios are going to be entirely different, because one scenario, the short term, where not a lot of that adaptation has occurred, just a small amount, enough to lose that period. But in this longer scenario, what we're really looking at is almost like an epigenetic adaptation, where those switches in the body that are turning on and off for these adaptations are happening quickly, or more quickly for this person, because we go to put them back in a deficit, and their body's like, oh, hey, we remember this, we don't like this, let's not do that again, right? So they shut you down quick. So that those adaptations that happened before, that increased cortisol, that decreased conversion from T4 to T3, those leptin level changes, those ghrelin level changes, those sex hormone changes, all those things are happening so much faster, because the body's like, hey, we remember this, we don't want to do this again, we're shutting it down. So what does it do? It adapts very, very quickly. And people will see this too. I mean, I've seen it plenty of times in people where they go through these correction phases and they get to where it appears that they're okay, but they don't hold long enough and they go back into a deficit. Inevitably, their body just shuts down like fast. And that's it's very, very discouraging when you've gone through all that work. So my point there is just make sure that you are holding for an extended period of time. Long-term outlook, don't repeat your mistakes. Yeah, I mean, again, why did it happen? Don't do the same things that you did. if you do want to prep, again, if it's a prep situation, you have to understand that a lot of the people will still have to go to extremes for prep. So you have to ask yourself, is this something that I can even accomplish without, again, hurting myself again? But maybe there was something you did in your last prep that you can fix in the next one. Maybe you're a female and you had a coach that had you doing 900 calories for 16 weeks and 2 hours of cardio the whole time. Can you correct that? Yeah, I mean, probably if you get to a better starting point and are a little more strategic with things. But maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe you did a pretty good prep. Maybe it was hard, but it was strategic, and it was very well thought out, and working with a reputable coach and this and that. And you still have these issues, because guess what? That can happen. It's not foolproof. Nothing's foolproof. You might be that person that wants to think, maybe my body's just not going to allow me to get to those extremes, because that's the nature of the beast sometimes. Permanent changes. Those would be your permanent changes. Like, should I do this again or not? What is really my limit, and what can I do, and where can I be comfortable? Age. We'll skip the HRT. Well, the HRT and the age may come together too, but these issues may get harder as a person gets older, or the more times it happens. If I have a client where we're recovering some harsh amenorrhea 3 times over their competitive lifespan, I'm not talking like post-show period comes back after a couple months. I'm talking like we have 3 periods in there where it's like multi-year recoveries, and they're getting into their late 30s and into their 40s. We can't keep doing this. It's not, eventually nothing's going to happen, or we're going to have just really severe issues. The older you get, inevitably the harder it's going to get to recover. And I see a lot of this like premature menopausal type of scenarios in the people that are a little bit older, whereas the 20-year-old or 22-year-old or whatever, I might be able to recover a little bit easier out of a harsh scenario. Their body hasn't been exposed to as much accumulative stress yet because they're younger. And they also haven't had any natural hormonal decline with, that comes with age, because again, they're younger. HRT, when does this kind of come into play? There might be a scenario where the hormones aren't coming back, because yes, that can happen, especially when you get into these like hypothalamic causes and the hormones just aren't coming back. And even with gaining body fat and staying out of a deficit and detraining to a pretty significant degree and eating enough and this and that, they're just not getting response after very long periods of time. These might be people that are HRT candidates. That would be a discussion to obviously have with a doctor, partner, spouse, whatever. Think about if that's something that you want to do. Coach, whoever's helping you. And also people that are maybe getting into that age range that I talked about before, that we were able to recover them, but they still want to pursue competing, might consider HRT, because they're going to end up on it anyhow. Really the reality of the situation, or they're going to end up needing it anyhow, and they may be healthier with it than without it. So it's not that, hormone replacement certainly has a place in the scenario depending on age and depending on what the future holds in terms of body composition, whether it's competing or whatever. If it's like a younger person that's super young and their body's just really struggling to get that lean, I'm always going to probably talk about the idea of just not doing that to their body in the first place and letting it function normally, obviously before resorting to HRT, because the problem is that even with HRT, while that recovers our sex hormones, we can still really screw up that whole adrenal axis. And yeah, we're not worried about like cortisol stealing our progesterone production, but we are worried about how they feel, hypoadrenal function, and just a body that's completely feeling like crap. Because you can put someone on HRT and they can still not lose fat. Yeah, they have testosterone, they have estrogen, they have whatever, but they could still have extremely resistant body to fat loss. So I think that's very, very important to keep in mind, that this is not an out. That is not an out for like, go abuse yourself. And you can ask the same thing with males that are on testosterone replacement. You had low tests from abusing yourself through competing, whatever. Fixing that is not your out to go back and do the same thing again. That will not work, because there's a lot of other mechanisms that are going to try to shut you down. So keep that in mind. There are really no outs. Even with thyroid replacement, even if you had exogenous thyroid plus exogenous HRT, or exogenous sex hormones, it's not an out. that is a little bit about amenorrhea, causes, the difference between primary and secondary, some timelines to consider in fixing it, and just some overall tips how not to do it, and hopefully some people avoid some mistakes. It's a lengthy process to fix in a lot of cases. I just hate to see people put in effort and then basically just get the shovel back out and start digging that hole again immediately after. It's unfortunately, it happens extremely often. It's hard enough to get through a recovery process for a lot of these people, but it's even worse when you do and then you go and screw it up again immediately. So just don't do that. It's not worth it, because it's going to get even more difficult. You thought the first recovery was hard. Just wait till the second one. Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that saves some people a lot of mental, emotional, and physical pain and stress and turmoil. And we'll talk to you guys next time.